views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, I'm Jose Higuera Lopez. Welcome to one more episode of the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Given the current pandemic, we welcome you remotely. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Yesenia Mata, director of La Colmena, a Staten Island nonprofit organization, and currently one of the organizations in the forefront supporting the immigrant community, which has been affected in a disproportionate way during this pandemic. Welcome, Yesenia.
Gracias por tenerme.
So, Yesenia, you're originally from Chicago. Can you share with us what influenced you to become an activist within your community?
Well, yes, I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago. I was raised in a beautiful neighborhood called Little Village, La Villita. And as soon as you walk into Little Village, the first thing you see is a big brick pink arch. And it says, Bienvenidos a La Villita. And as you keep walking through Little Village, you start seeing people selling tamales, champurrado, elotes, tacos. You see the colorfulness of the community. You start seeing the Mexican flags. And, you know, growing up in Little Village, I was so blessed to grow up in a neighborhood that was so rich in my culture. And that is the only thing I knew, the richness and the colorfulness of my culture. But also at the same time, growing in Little Village, as I started getting older, I started seeing various things. When I started high school, I remember I started with a huge class, and many of my friends that I knew from elementary school, we were like, oh my God, we're going to high school together. But throughout that time, each year, I started seeing my class diminishing. And I started seeing a trend, how many of my friends started either getting killed or they were sent to one of the jails in Little Village, the Cook County Jail, the jail in Chicago. And, you know, that jail was like 5 blocks away from my home. So I started seeing that trend, that many of my friends from school were being sent to that jail. And I started seeing many Black and brown bodies. At the time, I didn't know what that was, but I started asking those questions. I was like, why is this happening? And then each year I started seeing various activities that I used to like to do. Like, you know, I used to like to paint. I mean, I wasn't the best painter, but I used to like just going because I like to learn. But then I saw like activities like that being cut down. And I started saying, why? I mean, many of us like going there. Many of us like to play soccer too. Why? What's going on? And then I remember one time when I was walking home, I saw various people running. And then it turned out that it was a drive-by. And it wasn't that instinct that you automatically just went down and waited until the gunshot stopped. But it was like those things that at the time, they were normal to me. I was like, okay, well, this happens every day. It is what it is. But then, you know, I started seeing throughout the years too. I remember I was inside my house, and our neighbor ran inside our house, and she said, "Oh my God, Dios mío, ahí estaba la migra." And for me, that was normal because, you know, la migra siempre estaba in the neighborhood. The migra was always in the neighborhood. But I, you know, just seeing that fear in my neighbor's face and the mother's face, I was concerned because I was like, is this normal? Is this correct? Should this be happening? And then as soon as, you know, you walk out of my home too, the first thing you see many, you saw a coal plant, and you saw the black smoke coming out, and you started noticing many people in your neighborhood, kids getting asthma. And you're like, is this normal? Should this be happening? And the other thing I would always see was, you know, people would always just make fun of my parents because they didn't know how to speak English. because they were undocumented themselves. So I just started seeing that trend, and I started asking, is this normal? Should this be happening?
And all of this
And
just push you to get involved in the community?
yes, so just seeing all of that, I started asking those questions. What is going on? Why is this happening? Who's letting this happen, most importantly? And then I started seeing how elected officials would defund my community because it was brown. It was immigrant community saying, oh, don't go there because they don't vote. They can't vote. And that's when I slowly started getting involved in politics. I started saying, wait, hold on. It's many of us. It's so many of us that we have so much power. And it was a group of students that we started out in my back porch, and we started saying, hey, well, I'm going to turn 18. I could vote. You could vote. Let's see who else we could get to vote. I didn't know at the time what was going on. And as I started getting older, I realized what I was doing was grassroots organizing. What was happening with my friends was a school to prison pipeline system. What was happening in my community with ICE, that there were ICE coming to the community, it was ICE raids because, you know, people just wanted to attack our community. It was people that they wanted to take that I knew that didn't have any, that they were just good people. So I started seeing that there was something wrong in the political system, and that's how I started getting involved. And I always remember vividly one of the things about my father that triggered me at a very young age was when my dad would have to go pick up aluminum cans. He would wake up every morning like at 5 a.m. and I always wanted to go with him. And I was like, Papi, I want to go with you because I want to find toys. I used to love finding toys, right? But I remember one time when I went, I was about 5, 6 years old. And I always say this because I remember somebody looked at my father and they started like giggling, looking at my dad up and down. And I was little and I didn't know what that felt like, but I felt embarrassed. And I was 5 and 6. You see, a little kid, how can a little kid feel like that? And I remember I just looked down and I wanted to cry because in my mind, I was like, why am I embarrassed? But why is this person making fun of my dad when my dad is such a loving father? And that is that moment when my father just lifted up my head and he was like, Mija, don't ever be ashamed of who you are. Be proud. So I think it was in that moment that triggered something that always led me to asking so many questions. Why is this happening? This shouldn't happen. But most importantly, who's letting this happen?
And Yesenia, fast forward when you start getting involved because of all these questions you were asking. I think it was in 2016 that you were also involved in the presidential election. You were the National Latino Outreach Strategist for then presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. We have 2 more minutes in this section. Can you just tell us what was your experience working in that capacity?
Well, yes, it was the work that I did that I ended up being recognized by Bernie Sanders, and he brought me on board to become his National Latino Outreach Strategist. What I started noticing was that the same things that were happening in my neighborhood were happening all around the country. And one of the things that I learned in that experience was just the power that we have as a community, but also how many elected officials always just take our community for granted. Again, they say, don't go to that community, they don't vote or they can't vote. And I think just being in that space, also in having that platform, I also understood what it meant having that responsibility and making sure that I educated my community, making sure that I empower them, that I organize them. And again, one thing that I saw in every country I went to was like, I just saw my father and my mother, just like every day, señor y señora, that, you know, they just want to know, they want to learn, and they just want to make sure that somebody's there to have their back. And that was something that I really wanted to bring to every state that I was in.
That's great. And just to close this section, can you tell us what brought you to New York?
Well, what brought me to New York was that in the Bernie Sanders campaign, I met my husband, and he told me about a beautiful area called Staten Island. I didn't know at the time Staten Island existed. I thought it was part of New Jersey. But, you know, when I came here, I started seeing the conservative side of Staten Island. And he's like, no, wait, you have to see La Colmena. And he brought me to La Colmena, and I saw this little spot, and I went in there, and I saw the ñañis, the indigenous group, having a meeting that day. There were about 40 of them in that room, and just hearing them speak Mixteco and hearing them like organizing, it was so beautiful because I was like, despite being in such conservative borough, they are here organizing. And that was the day when I was like, I'm staying here. I'm staying here because, like my husband said, it's easier to organize in a place that's already organized. It's harder to organize in a place that's not.
Yes.
And I
It's a
stay
really
here.
a great segue, but we need to take a break. Let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. We are speaking to Yesenia Mata, Executive Director of La Colmena. Yesenia, thank you again for being with us. You were talking about how getting to know about La Colmena brought you to New York also with your husband. Can you share with us how did you end up being now the Executive Director? Also, can you tell us what is the mission? Who founded La Colmena? Where is it? And what do you do during the year?
Well, I remember when I came here and I saw the ñañis having their meeting and seeing how they were trying to organize themselves. It was just a beautiful thing because, again, it brought me hope in an area that was so conservative. And I started getting involved with La Colmena. I met the former executive director at the time, Gonzalo, and he introduced me to every group that La Colmena works with, which is the day labor group, the jornaleros and jornaleras, the mujeres liderando, which is the women's group. I met the unicorns, the Andafio LGBTQ, the first Andafio LGBTQ here on the island, and the youth group. And you see, when I saw all these groups, how they were trying to organize themselves, again, it brought so much hope that I wanted to get involved. I wanted to provide the skills that I have and to help the community out. And most importantly, like I always say it's I always let others lead. I always tell people, like my community, use me with what is it that you need, because I that's what I'm here for. And I remember when I met all of these groups, again, like what they did was brought me so much hope, because it was the workers themselves, the day labor group, the domestic workers, the everyday immigrant father, immigrant mother who founded La Colmena back in 2014. They wanted a space that they could call their own, a space that represented them, a space that was actually led by them. And even now, as the ED, as the executive director, it is them that lead me. I always tell people, I am the executive director, I get it, but it is the community leaders, the everyday señoras and señores that lead me. And I always say, like, I love them, pero si me regañan every day. They're like, no, you need to do this, you need to do that. But that's what I'm saying. It is a community that manages La Colmena. And I think, when I was asked by the community themselves, you should apply for this position, you should apply for executive director. As a young woman of color, you always feel like, oh, I'm not qualified enough, or I don't have the experience to do this. But it was beautiful to see that it was my own community that was like, no, you should apply, and you will be a great fit for this. But again, it also took a while within me to understand also that I am qualified enough to become executive director. But that is also a lot of things that women of color go through, that it takes them a while to really understand that they could also do this. But again, it was through the support of the community that I was able to apply, and thankfully I became the ED of La Colmena.
That's great. Congratulations. And can you tell us, does La Colmena only serve the Mexican community, or does it serve other Latinos or immigrants?
La Colmena serves the immigrant community as a whole. And La Colmena has various people from various parts of the world. We have people that are from Honduras, that are from Colombia, that are from Peru, and also we partner up with various other allies as well, like allies that want to be part of La Colmena, that want to support us, that are Caucasian, that they want to also know how they could volunteer with La Colmena. So La Colmena as a whole provides services to every immigrant community. Obviously, we have a huge population here in Port Richmond area that are from Mexican descent, but again, we try to keep it very open, and we also work very closely with the Ghanaian community, the African community. That also, again, we provide the space for other communities to also organize. Again, we will not be organizing other communities because we respect each leader from each community. We know we are allies to any other community. We provide that support to them too.
And Yesenia, can you talk to what are the challenges that the organization faces right now?
Well, since the pandemic hit, one of the things was that we decided not to close our doors on our immigrant community. One of the things we said was, how can we close our doors on our immigrant community in moments like this? How can we do that? Like, that was just something that I couldn't comprehend, like how that could happen. And we refused to close our doors. One of the things that I was getting from other people was like, well, what would happen if the mayor comes and shuts you down? And I said, La Colmena is a building, but that doesn't take away the organizing. We could organize anywhere, and we will continue providing those services to our immigrant community. We just couldn't close our doors. And from that time, we started seeing how many of our members started losing work, how people were just using our members to do deep cleaning and then just being like put to the side and said, okay, now you clean, we'll call you again some other time. And we saw about the emergency relief fund that didn't include the immigrant worker. So in that moment, it was Doña Maria, and you should meet Doña Maria. She's a powerhouse. She looks so cute and adorable. I love her, but she's a powerhouse. I always tell people, don't get Doña Maria mad, because believe me. But no, she started telling me, Yesenia, como me la pinten, yo brinco, right? Meaning, however you paint the picture, I will, overcome that. And it was a woman themselves that started organizing, that started making masks. They started selling a portion of the mask, but then the other portion they would donate it to first responders. They started donating it to police officers, to teachers, to nurses, to bus drivers, and the workers ourselves. They were saying our workers need to have proper PPE in order for them to be able to go, if they go to work. So they were able to provide themselves with jobs. We started then shifting to food distribution. And at first, empezamos con 40 meals. We started with 40 meals. And we were just so excited. We're like, oh my God, people are donating 40 meals to us. But before you know it, one day we opened the door and there were about like 200 people outside. And we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And thankfully, people started donating so much food to us that we were able to serve many people. We served about 300 or 500 people every Wednesday. And then through that, we also received funds to provide people economic support. And that was so grateful to see how we were able to help out our immigrant community with economic support. People that also needed burial assistance, we ended up shifting that direction. We were providing services to our immigrant community without any help from the government, without any help from any elected official. We did that as a community. And that is something that we keep emphasizing, because we don't want people to forget what happened here. What happened to our immigrant community, that they were left with no support, and it was the immigrant community themselves that lifted each other up. Yes, we understand that they were like famous chefs and they were famous people donating money, but no, it was the community themselves that picked the own community up. So we don't want people to forget what happened here, how the government abandoned our immigrant community, how some politicians abandoned our immigrant community. And now what they did was just make the immigrant community stronger. And now, like, when it comes to the census, like, everybody's like, yo estoy aquí, I want to get counted now. I want to get counted, because here we are, and they're like, we want to show the power.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing this part of La Colmena. And let's take another short break. This is the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. We are speaking to Yesenia Mata, Executive Director of La Colmena. Yesenia, you left off a little bit talking about the immigrant community, the challenges that they're facing, specifically during this pandemic. Can you talk to that? What are the challenges that the immigrant population is facing to access different resources? Can you talk to this?
Yes, well, when the pandemic hit, there was difficulty for them to get resources. One of the things that people were saying was that, oh, well, if you get sick, you could go to the hospital, even if you don't have insurance. And one of the things was that when people are so disconnected from working with our immigrant community, one of the things that, as an advocate, when I was in certain phone calls, I would always say, it's really easy to say that. it's really easy also to tell people, oh, stay home, don't come out, when you don't understand what they're going through. And one of the things I would always emphasize was that it's really hard for the immigrant community to stay home because there's no available resources for them. They still need to go out. They still need to look for jobs. They wish they could stay home with their children, but they can't. They are not providing any sort of relief. When they go to the hospital, they're afraid to go to the hospital because they're afraid of becoming a public charge. You see, one of the things was that there was no resources for the immigrant community at the time. And if there were resources given out somewhere, one of the things we would always say was that right now there's a lot of distrust when it comes to our community, that they're not going to go over there. They want to go to a place that speaks their language, that they know the people. And that was what we decided to do, to bring that to our community and let them know that they could come here for economic support, that they could come here for food, that they could come here for us to provide them with burial assistance, for legal advice, that we are here and that they're not alone.
And what do you think are going to be the challenges for the immigrant community in the aftermath of COVID-19, of this pandemic?
Our immigrant community is going to be used for deep cleaning. You see, like Maribel from Mujeres Liderando always says, who do you think is going to do the deep cleaning when the city opens us? It's going to be us, it's going to be me, it's going to be the immigrant woman. And that is one of the challenges that we face, that we want to make sure that the immigrant community, the immigrant worker is not excluded from any sort of safety relief or emergency relief, because they are the ones that are going to be used. They are currently even being used to clean the train in non-safety, like not using not having the proper PPE. You see, like, we already know that this is going to be the aftermath. They are going to be the ones being used. Who do you think is going to be getting sick? It's going to be our immigrant community. Again, there's a huge percentage of Latinos were affected. Latinos were the ones that were affected the most by this COVID-19, which comes to no surprise.
Yes. And Yesenia, are there other projects that Colmena is pursuing right now, or is going to pursue in the future, given the reimagining of this new normality? Do you have anything at hand right now?
Well, the Colmena is still now, like, the Colmena still has been managing, right? We haven't closed our doors. We're still providing all these additional services. However, one of the things that we are doing is preparing our community. For example, we are right now hosting gardening classes for our workers, making sure that right now is the season where people are going to want to hire gardeners. So we're providing that support to them, training them, but at the same time providing them with the proper PPE as well. With the women, they are now working on creating or buying their own organic chemicals, because they say, hey, I don't want to be using like hazardous chemicals. I want to use chemicals that I know will not affect me, harm me. So they are thinking ahead, already purchasing these types of organic chemicals, making sure that they are protected and other women are protected. And as a whole, like when we are hosting our classes, OSHA and SSC classes, which is what workers need to go through in order to be able to work at a job site, so the employer can know that they have the proper training. We are also making sure that we maintain our distance with people, that the students do as well maintain the distance. So we are obviously following protocols, but most importantly, what we're doing is preparing ourselves for what's to come, because we don't want, again, our immigrant community, we know that they're not going to be provided support. We already know it. I mean, they were forgotten even when this pandemic started. So we want to make sure that we train them, that they have the proper PPE, and that they're being taken care of.
That's great. Yesenia, can you tell us, I know that you also, on top of all of this, you also joined the armed forces. Can you tell us about your experience joining the armed forces? We have a few minutes, so I want to get that part of your story also included.
Well, yes, my oldest brother served in the Army back in 2011, and that is something that I've always, throughout my life, I always wanted to do. However, just with everything that, with activism and everything that was happening at the time, and my brother being in the military, it just made things, my parents were always telling me, mija, don't join, say, rethink it, right? So one of the things was, like, through my activism, it led me all the way to Tijuana in the deported veterans bunker.
Mhm.
And it led me there, and one of the things that I saw was that there were many veterans that had been deported. And I started working with them, making sure that I went to Washington and advocated for them. And one of the things I remember, I was speaking with one of the veterans, and I told him, would you still join the Army despite all of this that had happened? And his answer was like, yes, if I had the opportunity to join again, I would. And one of the things was that it was in that moment when I decided I'm joining. I'm joining the military. One, because it was in that moment when, as well, I felt supported by my spouse. I felt supported by my family to join. But also, it goes back to the same thing. I'm a woman. I always felt like, oh, I can't do it. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And there were many people that were telling me, like, oh, are you sure you're going to be able to graduate? I don't think you could. You're tiny. You're 5'1". And one of the things is like, no, I could do it. And I have the support system, and I know I can. And again, it takes a while, and it took me a while to get that confidence that I know I could finish this.
Mhm.
And throughout my training, it was me waking up at 4 a.m., training till 8 p.m., doing the 15 miles, rucking, which rucking consists of 60 pounds on your back. And I remember there were a couple of males that were complaining, and they were about 6'1", and I would look up and I was like, you're complaining. Look at me. Like, the rucksack was the same size as me practically. But you see, when I finished the military, when I finished my training, I remember I looked at my dad, and at first he didn't want me to join because he was afraid. But, I looked at my dad when I graduated, and I was like, oh, papi, I did it. And then he told me, he's like, no, mija, I always knew you could do it. He's like, I always told you that to be proud of who you are. And he's like, I always knew you could accomplish this. And, but again, I think with every parent, right, when their daughter or son tells them, I'm joining the military, what is the first thing they process their mind, right? But again, I always tell other women of color, young women of color, that understand that you are very powerful. And, I understand at times things may be difficult, and that confidence at times is very hard, right? Because I know I went through it, and I still go through it sometimes, but it's always through the support of the community that, that there's so many people looking up to you and making sure that, to make sure that you become that role model for other young women of color. And, but yes, it has been an interesting experience. I'm a 31 Bravo military police in the U.S. Army.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that part also. We're actually out of time, but I want to ask you real quick in a few seconds, how would you like to be remembered in New York?
The way that I would like to be remembered is just someone that's fair. I have seen how people have been so unfair to my parents and growing up, and I've always wanted just people to be fair to my parents, just treat them right. And that is the way that I want to be remembered, someone that was fair and that treated people right.
That's beautiful, Yesenia. Thank you again, Yesenia, for sharing this story and your story with us. And thank you also for joining us at the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Please stay safe.